decision, but this is not just because you disagree. You're looking at a procedural aspect to this.
Well, it's exactly right. And it's not to say, Bill, that had I been in discussions with people around how we would move forward with transit or LRT in Hamilton, I would bring my complaints forward. We would discuss them. It would end up someplace. All of a sudden, out of the blue, we find all of this money. I have no idea, especially in view of the fact that Bonnie Lysyk thinks it's around, the Auditor General of Ontario thinks the $5 billion is probably the number. We come up with 3.4 as the total number and a 1.7 billion contribution by the federal government only for an LRT project. And it doesn't make sense to me. So I have an opportunity to ask the parliamentary budget officer, and they're considering a review, just to see, does this comply with the grant programs, how they work, how they're set up, and so on, because frankly, shame on me, but I can't figure it out, and I don't think half a council can figure it out either.
There was a statement issued, Bob. I don't know if you've seen this yet, a joint statement from Minister McKenna and Minister Tassi. I'm not going to read the whole thing, it's long, but there are a couple of lines here I just wanted to get your comment on. It says, "We support strong cities and respect transit decisions made by local decision makers based on what is best for their communities. The Hamilton LRT, a shovel-ready project that was supported by the previous Hamilton Council, was the fifth priority transit project to be prioritized by the Ontario government with a request for federal funding." And one other line here. MP Bob Bratina's position on this project is well known, dating back more than a decade. Of course, he has been involved in numerous discussions and engagements about the project and the federal government's role in it. And it goes on and on and on, but that's the gist of the letter. Your comments on that?
Well, first of all, I would love to see somebody define shovel ready, because if you Google it, there's actually no real definition for it, but it's roughly a project that can come forward in 3 to 4 months. Whatever the decision is, or the definition of shovel-ready, this project cannot go into the ground for the better part of 2 years. To the idea that you can start digging a hole early in the next year is, to my mind, ridiculous. But what I think the plot is here is, if we can just start digging this thing up, it's just like Metrolinx pulled off this stunt of buying those properties. They had no business buying those properties, in my opinion, but they bought them anyway, and then they said, well, we've already bought the property, and so I think somehow if they can get some kind of a shovel into the ground, then the taxpayer of Hamilton, no matter what the numbers are going to get stuck for the next 30 years paying for something that they really don't need. This project is not a transit project. They don't need it. There are many better ways of spending that money and getting a better transit service throughout the city. I don't know how anybody who has a transit mind could see this as a transit project, and even Metrolinx. Metrolinx said this is an attractive transit option. Well, who needs the money from Hamilton and Canadian taxpayers for attractive options? We need options that are going to work. And this one is frankly a joke, because there are 53 bus stops between Eastgate Square and McMaster University. When you put the LRT in, there's 17 stops. That's better. Really? I mean, the proposal is so ridiculous. But if all of the things comply with proper, compliance with government programs and so on, fine. But I'm certainly not aware of it. And just think of this too, Bill. I'm the Hamilton East Stony Creek Member of Parliament. Part of that suddenly appears in my riding, unbeknownst to me, and the 3 municipal councillors who are in my riding are all against it. So the MP and the 3 councillors are against it, but don't ask them anything. You see where I'm coming from?
Oh, listen, the Ontario government's going to start plowing through and build a highway right across the green belt. I mean, and every town that's involved with that is against it too. So I mean, when governments have their mindset on something, they're going to go through it, and don't let the facts get in the way. That shouldn't be surprising to you. But the whole idea, are you under the impression, or are you getting the impression from some of your colleagues that if they get the shovel in the ground on this, that's past the point of no return?
That's what it seems to me the plot is here, rushing headlong, and because all those Toronto projects are underway. So this gets bundled in as though it's one of the five priority projects. It's months, if not years away from moving ahead. But all of a sudden, those other projects in Toronto are contingent on the province buying into the whole thing. So they bully the province. They bully the city of Hamilton. We're going to give you the money, but it's only going to be for LRT. Well, if Hamilton City Council feels that their transit option, the solution for Hamilton, is something else, the federal government has to be in place through their infrastructure programs to assist them, not to tell them it's this one or nothing. And that, I just can't believe that came out of the minister's mouth at that conference.
Two ministers, that Minister Mulrooney and Minister McKenna, basically, I talked to them, both of them that day, Bob, as you well know, and that was the message loud and clear from them. It's LRT or nothing. So it wasn't, hey, here's the money, we for transit, you guys do what you want, which is usually what governments do. I get that. And it's up to them. You want to buy buses, you want to do whatever you want. You get some choices here, but this is not a choice, which is, I had one counselor say it's like putting a gun to my head, but I'm not so sure it's that dramatic, but it's going to be a yes or no on this. But when those ministers speaking for their government say this is the only option you've got, is the debate over?
No, because we're continuing the debate with things like my interventions. And I honestly, Bill, as much as my detractors attack me personally, without going through point by point, well, he said this, but this is the truth, or that, or that. No, it's just that I'm some kind of an idiot or whatever. That's fine. I was through that in the last election, and I did pretty well. But on the other side of it, are very well-founded discussions going on based on the approach that I've taken that weigh in on the merits of what I'm saying. And so I'm glad to sit. I would gladly sit in an auditorium if we had, social distancing was not the case, with Minister McKenna and Tassi and say, okay, let's go point by point over this and let's figure out what the best thing for Hamilton is. I've had this file since 2007. The first day that it came in, I went right to Jill Stevens, the engineer in charge of the project at the city, and said, Jill, great LRT, we're going to have it, but this route doesn't work. It's got to go A-line, airport, hospital, another hospital, city administrative center, GO station, waterfront. Where does this one go? It goes from Eastgate Square to McMaster. And it doesn't attack GO stations. There's not even any growth. You plan transit around growth. Where's the growth? Stony Creek Mountain, Airport District, and so on. They're hoping somebody's going to build a big condo at the corner of Kenilworth and Main with, clever-looking people with briefcases all going and getting on a nice, shiny train to go downtown. It's so ridiculous. And even the Metrolinx documents say they do not anticipate much commercial or residential growth on the central and east parts of the route. That's in the Metrolinx document.
But are we still going to be debating the merits of this? I mean, this really comes down to funding at this stage, doesn't it? I mean, and that's the thrust of what you've asked the Parliamentary Budget Office to look at. I'm kind of intrigued by the response, though, Bob. They say they are considering the request, as you mentioned, whether or not to proceed with this. They go on to say the timing of analysis will depend on the level of interest from other parliamentarians, as well as other non-discretionary projects they're obligated to partake. They seem to be insinuating here that you're going to have to get some support from colleagues to even go forward on this. Or they may just come back and say, yeah, well, our docket's pretty full. We haven't got time for this right now. So there's no guarantee this is actually going to happen, is there?
Well, no, absolutely not. But I felt that I had to take this step, and I haven't been rejected so far. And when you talk about colleagues, there are 338 potential colleagues in Parliament. I had a nice chat this morning with Peter Kent, and he had some interesting things to say about Metrolinx. So I don't have to cobble together a little posse of the people who sit on my side of the House when we're allowed to sit in the House, which we're not. But it could be lots of other parliamentarians who would also be curious to know whether ministers can pull money out of the hat in the manner that it seems to have happened. And I'm glad to, if this does go through and there is a review and everything's fine, great. But you don't know that, and I don't know that right now. And nobody on council knows that. Phil Verster doesn't. There's another guy, Metrolinx, of all this time that we took, and we still didn't get the answers the last meeting, so the whole thing was delayed. And now I understand there's some information as the city published something about, maybe you haven't read it, but somebody called me to say, oh, they're claiming it's the cost to the taxpayer would be between 8 and 16 million for operation and maintenance on an annual basis. Did you hear that?
The number that I saw was 600 million gross over 30 years, or $20 million a year.
Right. Okay. That's the number roughly that I would say is closer to the mark. I think there's a lower number that the city is publishing. But whatever the case, 20 million doesn't include, apparently, because the real number seems to be 900 million, not 600 million, but that includes interest and inflation. So Warren Buffett is going to be delighted to know that somebody in the city thinks there's going to be no inflation and no interest rates increase in the next 30 years. That's a wonderful piece of investment knowledge. But let's say it is 20 million, Bill. Every year for the next 30 years, the taxpayers of the city of Hamilton are going to be paying $20 million every year for what? What could you do with the $20 million?
Well, yeah, but when they had the debate about this on council a couple of weeks ago, Bob was also pointed out to them that that $20 million that doesn't include, of course, the money that they're going to get from riders, the fare ridership, and that's supposed to mitigate that cost. Now, that's the argument anyway. But listen, I got a couple of minutes left. I want to ask you one other thing about process, if I could, because I was trying to get some information about this morning, and it was a little hazy. How much muscle does this office that you've asked them to look into, the Parliamentary Budget Office, have? Is their decision, if they do look at this, and we're kind of getting into the hypothesis here, if they go through with this, if they say, we got a problem here, what happens then? I mean, is what they say binding? Because is the government going to be forced to do something, or can they just say, well, okay, thanks for that, we'll catch you later? What's next here?
It's an independent body. Bonnie Illicik, the Auditor General of Ontario, is an independent auditor. She presents her findings, coroners, juries, and so on. So the point is that it could be very embarrassing for the federal government and one of its leading ministers to be presented with the fact that their procedures they took with regard to this grant did not comply with the grant. Now, what happens, that's up to Canadians to decide when they hear evidence about how things are done in Ottawa. And so people don't have to worry. For those of you who are just desperate to wait and get on that shiny train, nothing Bob Bratina is going to do will clobber that and just knock it off the rails. It's just food for thought. If we think that we're a smart government doing the best that we can for Canadians and Hamiltonians, then let's see the evidence. And if the evidence doesn't bear that out, well, there are elections coming up.
That's one hypothesis. The other one is the budget office does nothing. Sorry, we haven't got time for this, or sorry, we think this is frivolous. I mean, there could be any number of reasons why. Do you drop the fight? Is that it?
No, they would never say frivolous. They wouldn't have accepted it if it was frivolous. There's a clear understanding. It's a simple question. Did they go through the proper mechanisms, the way the program is designed to get that money? But then maybe the Treasury Board wants to take a look at it, because we're coming out of a pandemic with really no solid knowledge of how the economy, how we're going to support the huge debt that we're accumulating. And with so many needs, the city of Hamilton is $200 million every year short of fixing infrastructure. $200 million, and to move 6-inch pipes on Queenston Road over and put a new one in is not fixing the infrastructure of Hamilton. It's actually repairing infrastructure that's already been repaired in most cases. So there's no advantage in that.
We don't want to go too far down the road. I don't want to debate the pros and cons, because we've heard all those arguments. Because what the Parliamentary Budget Office is really going to look at is your request: is this within the bounds of what the government should be doing? Now, exactly. You've already told us that you're not going to run in the next federal election because you disagree with your government's position on this. We understand that. But if you want to continue your opposition to this, do you still consider public office as an option? Is that the pulpit you need to be able to continue that, or do you just go quietly into that good night after the next federal election?
Yeah, well, it's almost premature to say things like that, because certainly there are many voices in our government who are desperate to get a September election. However, that doesn't necessarily mean there will be one. And so I could be sitting around here until 2023, and which would be my original intention when I ran for this office. But should everything change, then I'd have to make another decision. And what would my options be? Because I'm actually trying to fix a problem I see in the Liberal Party. If decisions like this can be made the way they were made, to my understanding, I'm not in favor of that, and I think we can do better as a Liberal. I could run as an independent.
Getting into... Yeah, well, I was going to say, that doesn't necessarily... When you say...
We've got options.
Would you cross the floor in Parliament? Would you run for another party?
No, I wouldn't cross the floor, but they might throw me out. Then I'd be an independent.
So that's an option. Running for mayor is an option, but you haven't made up your mind about either yet?
No. I want to get this nailed down. And for all I know, I'll still be around for the next couple of years. Who knows, Bill? But I'm not declaring anything. This is not about the future. This is solving a problem that's staring Hamilton taxpayers in the face. They haven't got a clue how much this is going to cost them, and nobody's really giving them good information.
Well, the next step, obviously, is with the Parliamentary Budget Office. The ball's in their court right now. We'll certainly be watching to see what they're going to do. Bob, thanks so much for this. Really appreciate it.